Spanish Civil War. Now, the Spanish Civil War is, of course, a very major event in world diplomacy, which plays a lot of the part. It plays a major part in our understanding of it. So, how did it happen? Let's start with some key dates. So, 1923, the Spanish monarchy collapsed, and there was a dictatorship for 7 years. In 1931, a new republic was established. Basically, the king thought that he could rebuild the constitutional monarchy, but the people were not in support, so he left the country, although he did not abdicate. For the first 3 years, we had a left-wing government. For the next 3 years, we had a right-wing government. Both of these instituted policies which were unpalatable, unacceptable to the other side. And in 1936, when the left won again, the right wing rose up into civil war. So why was the right and the left so divided? They were completely different. The right basically included very conservative people and religious people. There's religious conservatives, the military, which was conservative, the fascists, and the elites, which benefited from the system. But on the other hand, we had the left, which included anarchists, communists, liberals, and separatists. Because separatism was a factor, right? We have Catalonia, or the Basque country, which didn't want to be part of Spain, or at least wanted significant autonomy. We had these anarchists and the communists, like the people with the most radical ideologies, and we also had the liberals, so people who just wanted a normal democratic state. But there were significant issues because the economic and political system of Spain was rigged. It was very in favor of narrow few elites and very damaging to, very bad for like your average peasant or your average worker. And in this move to civil war, we see very lively discussions, we see bloodshed, and just this growing partisanship and this advent of political instability. And once again, in 1936, the bubble finally bursts, and we get the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, although it was effectively over by 1938. So actually both end dates generally tend to work. Both sides were benefited by international interventions. The entire world was playing a role. So the Italians and the Germans intervened in support of the nationalists, while the Republicans were supported by the Soviet and various international volunteers, often organized under the international brigades, which were organized by the Soviet Union in practice. But there was trickle down from around the world. Like in the top right corner, you can see the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Those were American volunteers who went to fight in Spain as part of one of the internationals. But the question that we have about the French and the British didn't want to get too involved in it. They didn't want to ship arms or anything to Spain, despite supporting the Republicans. But a major question is, who are the Soviets for the Republicans? Were they allies or manipulators? Because, well, yeah, they provided a lot of aid, planes, tanks, equipment, and these international brigades. But on the other hand, they were really working to undermine the Spanish government and support communism in Spain. They brought in the NKVD, the Spanish police. They were meddling behind the scenes in a lot of political matters, and this was seen internationally and within Spain and the Republicans. So that actually really helped tank the image of the Soviet Union in the lead up to World War II, and also the cohesion of the Republicans. And there was also major differences between the sides. The Soviets were a much less trustworthy ally than the nationalists had in Italy or Germany. There weren't any of these power moves made by the Italians or the Germans. The nationalists were much more disciplined, because you have those conservatives, you have the army, you have the fascists, people who knew how to work. But on the Republican side, you have the anarchists who are chilling around in their autonomous zones, only bartering with people, not accepting money. You got the separatists trying to separate, you got the liberals trying to be normal, and you got the communists trying to bring about their revolution. So a much more varied camp, much more harder to coordinate. Then, in general, the Republicans had a tech advantage because the Soviet tanks were superior to what the Germans and the Italians were able to field at the time. After all, most of the German tanks provided were Panzerkampfwagen I or Panther ones, so only machine gun armament, and capable of fighting Soviet T-26s or or T-70s with, actual cannons on them. But the Nationalists soon grew into having a superior air capability because the level of the planes was similar in general, although increasingly better for the Axis with the introduction of the Bf-109. But by the end of the war, there were twice as many planes provided by the Spanish and the Germans to the Italians as the Soviets had provided to the Republicans. Yeah, and it's also important to consider that while so German and Italian aid remained significant, constant, relatively, Soviet aid really dwindled. So, as an illustrative example, the first 450 tanks were provided in 1936, the next 150 in 1937, and then the Republicans never got tanks again. And they still got some aid, but generally the support for armaments, for ammunition, for everything faded over time. So yeah, that's how we can understand the Spanish Civil War, its major events, why it happened the way it happened, and what were the factors which contributed to the Nationalists eventually becoming victorious, and how this affected the image of the Soviet Union internationally. And also remember Italy, right? How it weakened its military, as I mentioned previously. So yeah, this is basically the end of my presentation on the paper 1.